Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskind Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
I've always wanted to do that. Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Steve Dettelbach. I'm a proud member of the City Club, and it is my pleasure today to introduce today's speaker, somebody I have known for 30 years, since we were both 5, and had the good fortune to work alongside closely for 7 years, our United States Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, Carole S. Rendon. If you don't know, yeah, clap. If you don't know, the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio is the Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer for Ohio's northern 40 counties, tasked with enforcing a wide range of criminal and civil statutes, including the prosecution of crimes involving public corruption, civil rights, drug trafficking, fraud, human trafficking, defense of the United States agencies, firearms crimes, among many other lawsuits and violations. Carole S. Rendon was sworn in on July 15th after serving as acting U.S. Attorney since February. That's when some other person left the office. She received bipartisan support for her nomination from both Senators Sherrod Brown and Rob Portman, and was actually a Senate-confirmed U.S. Attorney, and that confirmation happened in an election year, a true testament to Ms. Rendon's widespread competence and the deep respect with which she has held all over the country. Prior to being nominated as U.S. Attorney, Ms. Rendon served as the first Assistant United States Attorney from 2009 through 2016. She was the first woman to hold that post. During that time, among many other accomplishments, she was the lead counsel in United States versus the City of Cleveland, an exhaustive investigation of the Cleveland Division of Police, which resulted in a comprehensive blueprint for reform within the division, a collaborative approach to achieving that result, and now a national model for police progress and reform. She also served as lead counsel in the litigation that resulted in enforcement of the Voting Rights Act and the implementation of bilingual ballots in both Cuyahoga and Lorain County, helped significantly in the John Demjanjuk case, and many, many others. A 2-time graduate of Northwestern University for undergrad and law school, Mr. Rendon began her career as a law clerk to the Honorable Joel Flom of the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, where her son is actually clerking now. She spent time in the Attorney General's Honors Program in the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice and the Organized Crime Strike Force Unit in Boston, and she actually became the chief of the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force in Boston, overseeing the major federal narcotics prosecutions and enforcement efforts over most of the East Coast of the United States. The U.S. Attorney's Office, as we speak, continues to grapple with significant issues that face our region and our country, including police and community relations, human trafficking, an ongoing opioid crisis, gun violence, fraud, corruption, and crime reduction across the season. Today, we will hear how our U.S. Attorney plans to address these issues, how she approaches them, how the office that she leads approaches them, and what steps are being taken in the journey to make Ohio a fairer and more just place. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club, please join me in welcoming United States Attorney Carole S. Rendon.
Thank you, Steve. You know, it's always such a pleasure for me when I get to do anything these days with Steve, who I still miss on a daily basis. And Dan, thank you for inviting me here today, and more importantly, for the work that you and the people who work at the City Club do day in and day out to protect and promote and improve this incredible jewel of our community. You know, to be invited to speak at the Citadel of Free Speech is really an amazing honor. And I don't know if any of you spend a lot of time looking at their website, but the thing that caught my attention is their mission. It is, quote, to create conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. Wow. Talk about an incredible job description, right? And I hope that our conversation today about the pursuit of justice will do just that. And I also want to thank the Hertz family for sponsoring this incredible series. For those of you who might not know, Dr. Hertz, not his brother David, who was recognized earlier, was for many, many years my kid's pediatrician. So one of the things that I love about living in Cleveland is how small and wonderful and connected our community is. So it's so nice to have them here today. And thank all of you for being here today. I specifically want to thank my family, sitting over here to my right, and especially my son Daniel, who flew all the way in from Chicago to be here today. And then, of course, I have tables filled with friends, which always makes me feel so wonderful whenever I am at one of these events. And the nice thing about that is that they're like half the audience, so that makes it really special. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm a Cleveland kid. I grew up here. I'm a proud graduate of Mayfield High School. I am a proud resident of Believeland. And when I left for college, I never thought I would come back here to live. But then about 15 years ago, my husband Michael and I did just that. We moved back here from Boston. And we did that because we wanted our boys to have what we had had growing up, a close family, close by. We wanted them to have a cheering section at their Little League games and their lacrosse games, at their band concerts and choir concerts. We want grandparents who would be a part of their daily lives, who would have a front row seat to watch them growing up. And I knew that we had achieved that when about 6 months after we had moved back home, my mom stopped by on her way home from work, as she often did. And as she was leaving, Daniel and his brother Alex hardly moved. And my mom said, "Oh my gosh, I'm already being taken for granted." And I was so excited because that was what I wanted. I didn't want a grandparent's visit to be like Christmas morning, right? I wanted it to be a part of their everyday life, and I'm so grateful that it has been. So when I decided to attend law school, I, like many idealistic young people, wanted to do so because I really wanted to spend my life pursuing justice. And I'm so grateful that every day, along with some incredible colleagues, I have the opportunity to do just that. I get up in the morning, and along with truly the most talented lawyers and support staff I have ever had the good fortune of working with, I get up, I drive to the federal courthouse, and together we pursue justice. With every case that we touch, we have exactly one objective: to figure out what's right and then do that thing. And talk about an amazing job. So many people think that our job is to catch the bad guys, right? Because that's the public face of our office. That's what so many of you see. But what you don't see are the hundreds of decisions that are made every week regarding who to indict and who not to indict, and what charges to bring, what civil cases to settle and on what terms, which investigations to open and which to close, which civil cases to bring to right a wrong committed against one of our citizens or our taxpayers as a whole. You don't see the daily interaction with our victims, victims of fraud, violent crime, human trafficking. You don't get to hear our internal meetings where we sit around together and try to figure out what is justice and then put together a strategy to get to that. So what you don't see, but I have the privilege of doing on your behalf every day, is in fact the daily pursuit of justice. There's a quote on the wall of the Attorney General's conference room in the Department of Justice, and it reads, quote, "The United States wins its case whenever justice is done one of its citizens in the courts." Not we win when someone is convicted or we win when we get a favorable verdict in a civil case. No, we win, and we only win when justice is done in our courts, period. That's why the pursuit of justice is, in fact, our job description. So the more difficult task is to explain to all of you how it is that we pursue justice. And I'm going to try to do that by highlighting some, but just some of the important work we're doing in several areas of the law that are currently amongst our highest priorities. And what I want you to know up front is that there is a common denominator to all of these, and that is partnership, collaboration. So Here in Believe Land, we just finished a monumental summer. It was crazy, it was busy, it was so exciting. We got to see the rebirth of Public Square, the Cavaliers Championship and citywide celebration, a successful and peaceful Republican National Convention, and next on the list, an Indians pennant and the celebratory parade. And so what do all of those events have in common? Partnership. So they all had incredibly talented people working together to make them happen. None of those things came off just by luck. Some of the people worked in the glare of the spotlights, but many other people worked behind the scenes to make them look seamless and perfect. And for each of these amazing achievements, the finished product was just that, seamless and perfect. So today you can go to Public Square and watch kids and adults playing in the fountains, and you can, cheer on the Cavaliers as we all did, packed together in our downtown area, or watch smiling police officers riding around on bicycles. But those results only came about as a result of months and even years, in some instances, of work together as a community. And in their own way, each of those end results was possible only because people of different backgrounds, expertise, and life experiences broke out of their comfort zones to work together. And they did so for the greater benefit of our common community. So given what we deal with every day in our office, it's quite easy to become jaded and cynical. The drugs keep pouring in. No matter what we do, violent crime persists. And I go to bed every night worried about that one unhinged individual who might decide to take matters into his or her own hands and come after us. That person who might be flying under the radar screen, who then shows up in an attack on innocent civilians at a nightclub or a mall or on our streets or on our computers. The crime threats facing our region are serious, and they present enormous challenges. But my goal today is not to scare all of you, because I believe we can beat back these crime threats, because we've always made progress in Cleveland, and we're working on these the same way we as Clevelanders always work. And that's by working together, getting out of our comfort zones, tapping into our shared expertise and experiences, working together, because together we're stronger, and together we can build a better and more wonderful community for all of us to live in, to pursue justice together. So let me start with national security. The primary responsibility of federal law enforcement is to protect our nation from threats, foreign and domestic. And to that end, national security remains our #1 priority and will be our top priority for as far into the future as I can see with my limited crystal ball. This is a threat that we address not just when the RNC comes to town, but every day, every week, every month. And because of our laser focus on this significant threat, our national security docket has never been busier than it is today. As a result of the incredible work of the FBI and some of the wonderful lawyers that you see here in this room, we have more cases of international terrorism under indictment today than at any time in the last 5 years. And these cases run the gamut. They include Ohioans who delivered cash in Yemen to support al-Qaeda, an ISIS supporter in Lorain County who purchased an AK-47 when he was planning an attack here at home, and an Akron man who distributed the names, addresses, and photographs of U.S. service people and their families, including their young children, and encouraged all of his fellow ISIS supporters to go out and kill them. But the threat is not just from people who are getting radicalized online by ISIS. A few years ago, we convicted an Indiana man who drove to the Toledo area and set fire to the largest mosque in our district. He said he did so because he watched Fox News and saw the attacks on our troops in the Middle East, and he personally wanted to take revenge. We also prosecuted a white supremacist near Bowling Green, who, despite a prior manslaughter conviction, had amassed an arsenal of weapons and 40,000 rounds of ammunition, and was tracking the movements of African American and Jewish leaders. So the threats come in all ideologies, and their only commonality is their hatred and their desire to disrupt our lives and their willingness to harm or even kill innocent people in the process. And the threat continues to evolve. I'm betting that everyone in this room has a smartphone, and it's connected to you at all times, either on your hip or in your purse. And hopefully it's set to silent or vibrate. But it's really less of a phone and much more of a handheld computer, right? We use it to check our email, look at our friends' photographs on vacation, maybe reset the thermostat at home, pay our bills. But this wonderful development has also made us all so much more vulnerable. And we know that with our growing dependence on computers and handheld computers, we as individuals and as organizations must be more vigilant when it comes to cybersecurity. Protecting trade secrets, technological developments, and our creative edge is a top priority, both for our economy, but also for our national security. Yet, almost every single day, the most valuable assets of this nation and our region are quite literally under attack. Norton's cybercrime report put the global cost of cybercrime at nearly $400 billion a year. That's billion with a B. And the number of victims at more than 1 million a year. And it's not that these attacks are just more prevalent and do more damage in terms of dollars and research that's lost, but because we live in a global world, it's so much harder for us to investigate and prosecute and extradite the criminals behind these attacks. So last year, FBI Director James Comey told the Senate Homeland Security Committee that cyber attacks would likely eclipse terrorism, if you can believe that, in the coming decade. Because referring to cyberspace, Comey said, quote, "That's where the bad guys will go. There are no safe neighborhoods. We are all neighbors online." And that is so true. So recognizing the vulnerability that we all have in cyberspace, we did what we do best. We went out and collaborated with the brightest in our community to figure out how to address this growing threat. And from that collaboration emerged the Northeast Ohio Cybersecurity Consortium, and many of the members of the consortium are here with us today. It is literally a first of its kind in the country. It's a cyber information sharing organization that partners law enforcement with the private sector, and putting together the insights of those two, our private and public sector and our law enforcement, is what makes the difference in terms of our ability to protect ourselves. So the partnership that we formed was between our office, the Secret Service, the FBI, the Cleveland Clinic, Federal Reserve Bank, Case Western Reserve University, Goodyear, Eaton, First Energy, Steris, Diebold, the Cleveland Foundation, and a host of other educational, private employers, and public sector partners. So you can see from the breadth of that partnership that it takes all of us working together to try to protect our region. And the whole purpose of the Cyber Consortium is to literally draw a line around our region, a cyber defense for Northeast Ohio. And it was organized with that specific plan, and to address together and mitigate together, to crowdsource the defense to the ever-increasing cyber attacks that we experience, and to cultivate the next generation of cyber talent and bring them to our region. So together, we are much more capable of addressing this problem. It takes all of us working together. The opioid and heroin crisis. In Ohio, we're in the midst of a crime problem and a public health emergency, the likes of which I have not seen in my 20 years in law enforcement. Heroin and fentanyl are spreading a wave of death and destruction throughout our community, and it knows no boundaries. It's an equal opportunity killer of men and women, people with master's degrees and high school dropouts, people who live in the city and the suburbs and in rural areas, young and old, black, white, and brown. Every one of us is at risk. In most places in Ohio, you are more likely to die of a heroin overdose than in a car crash or to be murdered. In Cuyahoga County alone, more than 500 people are going to die of heroin and or fentanyl overdoses just this year. And that's 500 of our friends and colleagues and relatives and neighbors. And it's not just the overdose victims who suffer, it's the collateral damage that is done to their family and circle of friends as a result. Because every overdose victim is someone's son or daughter, mother or father, brother or sister, friend or colleague. It is literally tearing apart the fabric of our community. We see the impact every day. We see it in our emergency rooms and our NICUs. If you haven't heard anybody describe what it's like to watch a baby withdraw and detox from a heroin addiction, it's unbelievable. We're seeing it in our foster care system. We have an ever-increasing number of children in our foster care because one or both of their parents are addicted to opioids. We see it in our courts. Many of our judges say that they estimate more than 80% of their docket is a result of the heroin and opioid epidemic, whether it's a drug charge itself or the property crimes that the addicts commit to try to get the money they need to get their next fix. But I would argue that this is not primarily a law enforcement problem. This is actually more a medical and societal problem. So it started about 20 years ago when, for some reason, we in America decided we needed to be a pain-free society. And that led to what was perhaps at the time a laudable push to treat pain more humanely. That's when those charts started going up in your doctor's office, you know, the ones with the smiley face to the frowning face, what rates your pain on a scale of 1 to 10, that whole thing. And as a result, and I think not really realizing how addictive these medications were, the medical profession started using opioid prescriptions to try to effectively treat pain. And the effective treatment of pain became tied to hospital reimbursement, courtesy of the patient satisfaction survey. How satisfied were you with the way they managed your pain? And so this led to a dramatic increase in the number of prescription opioids that were being sent out into the community from our medical profession. So according to the Ohio State Pharmacy Board, in 1997, the number of painkillers prescribed per person in Ohio was 9. Fast forward to 2013, 66. 66 pain pills for every man, woman, and child in the state of Ohio. And I am quite confident that our pain levels did not go up by 700%, just the prescriptions, right? And we know this to be true in our own lives. This has happened to every one of you in this room. You've gone in for a routine medical procedure, or your spouse or your child, or you take your child in to have their wisdom teeth removed, and you come back with a prescription for 20 or 40 or 60 Percocet or Oxycontin. And maybe the person takes 1 or 2, and then they switch to Tylenol and Advil and control their pain that way. And those remaining pills, they sit in your medicine cabinet like ticking time bombs, waiting for your nephew or your neighbor or a friend to come by and find them in your medicine cabinet, and then they're started off on this horrific path to opioid addiction. Because what we've seen in law enforcement is no one wakes up in the morning and says, out of the blue, I'm going to get a syringe and I'm going to try heroin today. No, the opioids, they're the gateway drug to heroin addiction, because heroin is cheaper and more readily available, and then sometimes it's mixed with fentanyl, or today, analogs of fentanyl, or carfentanil, which is designed for use in large animals like elephants. It's never been made for human consumption. And that's what's leading to this rash of overdoses. So in response to this healthcare epidemic, we did what we do best. We collaborated. And 3 years ago, we created the U.S. Attorney's Heroin and Opioid Task Force. It's a partnership comprised of all of our leading healthcare institutions, and many of the members of the task force are here today. Treatment providers, our medical examiner, judges, federal, state, and local law enforcement, educators, our state medical and pharmacy boards, people in recovery, both of our senators, and many state and local legislators. And working together, we have maintained a consistent focus on every aspect of this problem: law enforcement, treatment, prevention, and education. And just last week, our task force was advised that we have received the Attorney General's award for community partnership. And the Attorney General's award is the highest award given out each year by the Department of Justice. This is truly a model for the nation. Yeah. But on the law enforcement end, which is the part that we do best, just in this past month, we have indicted 8 separate cases where we have charged the drug dealer with a 20-year minimum mandatory term of incarceration. It's called a death specification, because we could tie that drug dealer directly to an overdose. either an overdose where the person survived or a fatal overdose. And we are trying to punish them and punish them appropriately for the death and destruction that they're bringing to our community. And that now brings to 18 the number of such indictments we've brought just in the last year. But at the same time, we're working with our partners to prevent a new generation of addicts. We have got to stop this in its tracks. And we're trying to provide treatment to those who are already addicted, and we must change the way we practice medicine. So the task force takes what we call the all of the above approach, right? It's not A, B, C, it's answer D, all of the above, because unless all of us working together doing all of the above, we're not going to get ahead of this crisis. So we have to talk to our children, our friends, our family about the dangers of opioids. We have to cut off the flow of drugs coming into our community, and we have to make treatment available for those who are ready. And everyone in this room can help. So the next time you or a family member goes in for a minor medical procedure and the doctor wants to give you a prescription for 30 Percocet, ask, why do I need this? Won't Advil and ice do the trick? And if they really think that you're going to need some pain medication, ask them for a prescription for 3 days or 5. But if you end up with a prescription for 60 Percocet, go to the pharmacy and ask the pharmacist to give you 3 pills, not 30. Many people don't know that you can do that. You must know your rights. But even if you end up with the 30 pills, don't leave them sitting in your medicine cabinet. Take them to the DEA drug take-back on October 22nd, or to any one of your local law enforcement offices. Every police department has an anonymous drop box where you can get rid of this stuff and not leave it sitting in your homes. You know, we teach our children to wear their seatbelts and look both ways before they cross the street and never smoke and don't drink or drive. Drink and drive. See, my one who's over 21 would say, what? But we have to talk to them, and now I'll look at my high school students, at the earliest age, because this is as dangerous as any of those. And you have no idea until it's too late whether or not you're going to be addicted to this stuff. And so if you take a dare and you take it at a party, you could be totally altering the entire course of the rest of your life, because you can be addicted after a single dose of opioids, and then you'll fight that addiction the rest of your life. So finally, I want to talk about our work in civil rights, which is and will remain a key focus of our pursuit of justice. Working in partnership with the Cleveland Division of Police, the City of Cleveland, the Department of Justice, and our entire community, we have created and are now implementing a blueprint for comprehensive, sustainable reform of the Cleveland Division of Police. So this summer, we all watched with incredible pride as our police force, working hand in hand with the FBI, the Ohio State Patrol, the Coast Guard, and many, many others, showed the world that Cleveland rocks. And the cooperation that we saw between the police and the community during the RNC, that is just a preview of what we expect will be the everyday for the community of Cleveland and beyond as we implement the consent decree. That is the lasting legacy of this consent decree. And quite frankly, the thing that I am most honored to have had the opportunity to work on in my time in the Department of Justice. But community has been a cornerstone of this effort, and the community is now providing in real-time feedback on draft new use of force policies. But there's also going to be increased training for officers. We're going to be teaching them how to more effectively interact with people who are in crisis or who have mental health issues. And in the coming months, we'll be talking a lot about technology and equipment, improvements that they must have in order to do their jobs efficiently and effectively, so that they can be safe and our community can be safe. But as you all know, change does not come overnight, and change has never been easy. But change cannot be a one-way street. As we've said from the beginning, the vast majority of police officers here in Cleveland, in Northeast Ohio, and across the country do their jobs with dignity and respect, courageously, and with great care for the people that they serve. And it's incumbent upon all of us to thank them for the work that they do. We need to honor their sacrifices. And we should use the consent decree as an opportunity to press that magic reset button and change the dynamic between the police and the community. So what can you do? Get to know the officers who patrol your neighborhoods. Get involved with a community police watch. Go to a district meeting. Because only when we get to know each other as people, not as police and the residents, can we have that kind of a bond that we need to have the type of policing in our community that we want and respect and deserve. And finally, we're going to continue our work to protect the most vulnerable in our community. And that includes a renewed emphasis on human trafficking, which is a crime that truly hides in plain sight. It also includes enforcement on the civil side of all of our civil rights. So in 2010, we began working more closely with our federal law enforcement partners to truly address the problem of human trafficking. And since then, we have indicted nearly 50 people on human trafficking offenses, created a dedicated civil rights unit, the chief of which is here today, and engaged the community on prevention and education. And our cases have run the gamut, from runaways on whom pimps prey and then advertise them on Backpage.com and move them into the commercial sex industry, to people who come here as undocumented workers and are forced into labor trafficking. Our victims have included children too numerous to even fathom. Young girls and boys who found themselves in the commercial sex trade, kids from Guatemala who came here just trying to get a better life. They thought they were coming here for an education and an opportunity and found themselves working in deplorable conditions at an egg farm in Marion, Ohio. And last month, our efforts resulted in the groundbreaking conviction of a 55-year-old man from Parma who repeatedly paid to have sex with a 13-year-old girl. And this case marks the first time we have prosecuted a customer in a sex trafficking case. And I use the word customer with tremendous trepidation because, in my opinion, a 55-year-old man who pays to have sex with a 13-year-old girl is not a customer or a John. He's a child rapist. But the victim in that case, she took the stand and she looked her predator in the eye and she testified with incredible courage about what he had done. And because of her courage and the work of our incredible prosecution team, justice prevailed. And lest you think that hate no longer exists in America, this summer we indicted 2 Toledo men for beating an African-American man they just happened to drive by on the street. They drove by him in their truck, circled back, got out of their vehicle, and beat him badly, all the while using racial slurs. And it was only because 2 off-duty officers happened on the scene that the beating stopped. And then one of the defendants, we always like when they help us with the evidence, posted on Facebook that the attack was, quote, in the name of the white race. This is not the America of my dreams. But that is why the pursuit of justice matters every day. So while much work remains to be done, the women and men of the U.S. Attorney's Office stand ready to take on each new challenge. But we can't do it alone. So as every one of these examples show, we have to do it in partnership with all of you, working with all of us to pursue justice for our community, to create a place that is a wonderful place to live and work and raise children, a place that my children and yours will want to come back to and live in, a place where your grandchildren can thrive. So I want to close where I began. There's a quote from chapter 16, verse 20 of Deuteronomy that sums up completely my job and the job description of the U.S. Attorney's Office, a mission that's at the core of everything that we do and every decision that we make. And it's simply this, quote, justice, justice shall you pursue. And every day I think about that as I'm driving to the office, and I think how wonderful it is that we have these incredible people who have been willing to give their lives to do just that. Justice, justice, they pursue. So thank you all for being here today. It's been a pleasure talking with you. supposed to move.
No,
Sorry.
just right over there. It's fine. Today, at the City Club, we are enjoying a Friday forum with the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, Carole S. Rendon. We are about to begin the audience Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, or those of you joining via our radio broadcast webcast or our new live simulcast at the Parma Snow branch of the Cuyahoga County Public Library. If you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it to @TheCityClub, all one word, @TheCityClub, and our staff will try to work it into the program. We want to remind you that the questions you ask should be brief and to the point, and that they should actually be questions. Holding the microphones today are Content Coordinator Teddy Eisenberg and Marketing and Outreach Coordinator Faye Walker. May we have the first question, please?
Yes, you mentioned that you had done a lot of work on behalf of the bilingual ballot. Can you talk about that and other programs that you've done to help people who have recently arrived to this country and have a problem acquiring our language right off the bat?
Absolutely. So many years ago, working with the voting rights section of the Civil Rights Division within the Department of Justice, a couple of us in the office worked to try to enforce the Voting Rights Act in Cuyahoga County. So our county sadly had been out of compliance with the Voting Rights Act for the 40-plus years that it had been in effect. And the reason that we were out of compliance with the Voting Rights Act is people have an absolute fundamental right to vote. And just because they can't speak English well enough or read English well enough to understand the ballot does not disenfranchise them. And here in Cuyahoga County, we have a significant population of Puerto Rican Americans. These are Americans. They are U.S. citizens. And many of them grew up in Puerto Rico, where the language that is spoken and spoken in the schools is Spanish. But that fact doesn't make them any less U.S. citizens than anyone in this room. And the fact that they move here and then can't vote because they can't read English well enough to vote is abhorrent, and it's a violation of the Voting Rights Act. So we worked very actively with the Board of Elections of Cuyahoga County to reach a consent decree to bring the county into compliance with the Voting Rights Act. And that's why when you go to the polling places now, you see the signage is all in English and in Spanish. The ballots are all in English and in Spanish. And so if you're here and you can't read or write English well enough to vote, you can still vote. And we also help them put together a Spanish language advisory board whose goal it is and mission it is to go out into the Spanish-speaking communities in our area and encourage people to register to vote. All of those materials are now available both in English and in Spanish. And then we went out to Lorain County, which has a similarly large Spanish-speaking population, and did the same. So I'll digress for a second and tell you a quick story about voting with my then 7-year-old who's now 13. So in the middle of all of this, and it was, somewhat contentious litigation at the beginning, I took him with me to vote because I always take my kids with me to vote. And as we were walking into the polling place, there were 2 women who were coming out of our polling place, and they were speaking to one another in Chinese. And my 7-year-old looked at me and said, "Mommy, they're speaking Chinese. How can they vote? How were they able to vote?" And I thought, oh my God, my kid gets this. Why is this so hard for people to understand how important and fundamental that right is? So it's something that I'm very proud of that we've been able to protect for all of the citizens in our community. And I know every time I go to vote, it makes me feel great when I walk in and it says, your voting place both in English and in Spanish.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. This question has to do with a recent action by the United States Congress, having to do with really with sovereign immunity, with the idea that one's activities overseas did not necessarily result in the liability for your state. And I wondered whether the Department of Justice, and especially in this area, you've been gearing up for some major litigation, maybe brought by some local attorneys who represent, for example, the prisoners in Abu Ghraib or the victims of bombings in other parts of the world. It seemed to me this was a an extremely unusual decision, but it was almost unanimous.
So I will comment in very limited fashion because one of the things that we don't get involved in is legislation. But as you all know, there was a piece of legislation that was passed, I believe, yesterday, or the veto override was yesterday, first override of presidential veto in President Obama's administration. And as I understand it, it allows the victims of the 9/11 terrorist attacks to sue the Saudi government here in the United States. And you can debate the pros and cons of that legislation on both sides. The veto was approved by 97-1 vote. I don't know where our other two senators were. I don't know what the future implications of that will be, but I'm sure that as that rolls out and we see what happens with that litigation here in the United States, we'll have to prepare for what the result of that could be.
Hi. In today's environment where there are so many people protesting our law enforcement authorities and showing distrust and maybe even contempt, and we even have people of influence saying things casually like the system is rigged and so on. I wonder how you think today's hyper-politicized environment is impacting you and your team's ability to be able to do their job. And in your years in law enforcement, can you give us your assessment of what you think the relationship and the level of trust between the public and law enforcement authorities is now? Is it as bad as some people say that it is?
So it's a very difficult time for law enforcement in our country, and it's a very difficult time for the community. So this is an issue that has been brewing all across the country. And we saw it in our investigation of the Cleveland Division of Police. We did an exhaustive investigation of the division, and now mind you, there are many incredible officers who work for the Cleveland Division of Police. But we found a pattern or practice of the excessive use of force right here in our backyard. And that's what's led to the consent decree and the reform that we're currently implementing of the division. One of the things that's happened is, with the advent of the handheld computers that come with cameras, we have footage of interactions between the police and the community that we didn't have before. And sometimes that footage can be very, very helpful to the conversation and to determine what happened. Sometimes that footage can be very distorted depending on the angle at which it was shot or when it was started and stopped. But it does change the conversation. If from this we can have a national conversation, a productive and proactive conversation about what we want as a community from our police and what the police need from us to effectively and safely do our job, it will be a new day in America in law enforcement. Because really, the police are there to serve and protect us. That's their mission, that's their job. And they take that very, very seriously. The men and women that we work with on a daily basis are some of the most courageous people. My husband is a retired federal law enforcement agent, and so I know firsthand how dangerous and difficult and stressful that job is. He'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and head off to execute a search warrant, an arrest warrant, and I might not hear from him until 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon to know that he was safe. And so for the families and the officers, it really is very, very difficult and dangerous work. And we need them. We want them to do their job and do it well and to respect the Constitution in the process. And to do that, they need to know what the rules of the road are. They need to have the training so that that training just kicks in when they're in those split-second moments and have to make a decision. And they have to have the equipment and resources they need to do their job effectively and safely. And sadly, in many of our cities, including the city of Cleveland, they simply don't have that. So if you look at our new use of force policies that have been put out there for public comment, they are dramatically different from the use of force policies that the Division of Police was operating under until today. But once those are in place, they only work if the division has the time and the resources to train their officers to comply with those new policies. And the new policies are only effective if each of you give us your voice and tell us how you want the police to interact with our community. This is not a one-way street. This is a two-way street. And so I take hope from the fact that right here in my hometown, we are truly creating the division of police that will be the model for the United States. And we're doing that together with the division, with the city, with the department, and with the community, because we can only do this if we do it together.
Hi. It's wonderful to hear from such a well-spoken and obviously capable person in your position. You've just mentioned one thing that can make your job easier and impact Northeast Ohio, Northern Ohio. Is there another one or two things that would go to improve that you see can be affected and happen that would make things better for your job and impact the area in a positive way?
So for me, the thing that I think we all need the most is community engagement on a whole host of different areas. So you heard me talk today about human trafficking and the opioid crisis and community policing and so many other topics. Something in there probably speaks to everyone in this room. And if everyone just in this room, forget everybody else who's out there, if everyone just in this room rolled up their sleeves and got involved in just one thing, that ripple effect makes an enormous difference in our community. So one of the things I didn't talk about today at all, because it's not really in my lane, is education. But I will tell you, in the U.S. Attorney's Office, we all understand that without quality education, the cycle of hopelessness and poverty and crime will continue. And so we don't just talk about it and wring our hands about it and worry about it. No, we get out into the community and we teach. We tutor. So through the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association and our team captain, Marlon Primes, we teach at the Martin Luther King High School, have for years, the 3 R's program that helps kids learn the Constitution, rights, realities, and responsibilities. And we're actually using our own precious time to try to do that to make a difference. We also tutor at Memorial Elementary School. And Ann Rowland, who's here with us today, who's our deputy chief of the criminal division, tutors as well at a different school, the name of which I can't currently recall. But we all are out there doing this, right? And so there isn't a person in this room who couldn't find the time to roll up their sleeves and go help a child. That simple act can make a world of difference. And if every one of you does it, and you all touch a child, then that touches a family, and then that touches our community.
Hello. My question is facing the drug epidemic in Northeast Ohio, and it pertains to mandatory minimums. And I'm asking whether you think it is just or not for us to sentence low-level offenders of heroin and other drugs with mandatory minimums, even if they need help and a rehabilitation center, or do you think we should be putting them in prisons like we do now?
Excellent question. So we in the federal system actually don't incarcerate. We try not to incarcerate drug addicts. That's not the purpose of the work that we do. Our mission is to go after the major drug dealers who are bringing the drugs into our community, whether it's up from the southeast border via the Mexican cartels or directly via the internet from China. And so that's really our focal point. In the state court system, they have these two incredible courts, drug court and recovery court. And the purpose of those courts is when people do get arrested who are addicted to drugs, and maybe they had more than a use amount of drugs, instead of putting them in prison, we are trying to get them in treatment via those two courts. And the one focuses on people who simply have a drug addiction. The other, the recovery court, focuses on individuals who are dual diagnosed with some sort of mental health illness and drug addiction, which is very common. So a lot of these people have experienced trauma in their life and have mental illness. When it comes to the drug dealers, I absolutely do think they should be in jail because they are, the amount of death and destruction that they're bringing to our community is beyond my comprehension. I mean, as I was sitting in the other room getting ready to come in for lunch, Craig Tame, who's our law enforcement coordinator, came in and said, we just had another overdose death. And that happens all day long. I get an email every time there's a fatal overdose in Cuyahoga County, and it's all day and all night. This past weekend, there were 7 overdose deaths in 12 hours. I mean, we cannot go on like this. And so, in my opinion, we have to do everything possible. We have to use every single tool available to us to try to address this problem. And that starts with changing the way we practice medicine. It starts in our own homes with taking care of ourselves and our family. It means finding a way to get treatment to people who need it. Even though it's very expensive and hard to come by, we have to have more doctors who are certified to do medically assisted training. And so we need our healthcare institutions to get involved and on board, which they have been. And we need to use all of our law enforcement tools. And that includes when somebody kills somebody, they ought to go to jail for 20 years.
Ms. Rendon, what is your department doing with respect to the medical community and their abuse of the use of giving out prescriptions? I know it must be difficult for a 10, but I'm more concerned actually into the large institutions. I broke 3 ribs and got 50 Oxycontins for a couple broken ribs. I always I kid myself, but I says, if they're on, we should keep them, because if we ever need Social Security, we don't have any money, we can go out in the market and sell them. Have there been indictments with medical community members?
There have been, actually. So we, for a long time, there were a lot of doctors, we called them pill mills, who were doctors in name only, who were literally giving out prescriptions to anybody who would come in the door. They would, only allow you to pay in cash. And it didn't really matter what kind of symptom you were presenting with, they would just give you a prescription. We actually did one of the largest internet pill mill prosecutions in the nation. And these were people you could go online and order Oxycontin and they would deliver it to your house. I mean, it's horrific. And so there are, unfortunately, as there are in every profession, lawyers are not exempt from this, people who don't follow the rules, people who are in fact not doctors but criminals. And yes, we do prosecute them. And then on the prevention and treatment side, we are working hand in hand with all of the healthcare institutions and the pharmacy board and the medical board and the dental board to try to change the way that people are prescribing medication, trying to change the protocols that the hospitals use in terms of when they prescribe and how much they prescribe when somebody presents to them with something like 3 broken ribs. But all of you can also take responsibility for it in your own lives. So if you still have the rest of those pills, do not sell them on the street. Really bad things happen when you do that. But on October 22nd, take them to the DEA drug take-back and get rid of them safely, because you also don't want to just put them in the garbage, because that destroys our environment. So you really have to make sure that you're disposing of this stuff safely, either at your police department or at the DEA drug take-back.
Hi. The citizens of our county owe your office, and in fact, Ms. Rowland in particular, a tremendous thanks for uncovering the extent of public corruption in our county and doing something about it. I ask you, if enough history has gone by now for you to say, how did your office discover that that Cuyahoga County had such a vast problem and that it merited such an enormous investigation and prosecution? And if you can't answer that, how do you scan the 40-county area that you now serve for instances of public corruption, typically well hidden?
So I can't answer that. But I will tell you a little bit about how we, do investigations, just in general. And it's not just public corruption; it's any investigations that we are involved in. So we have agents who work for all of the various federal law enforcement agencies: FBI, DEA, IRS, ATF, you name it, and they are out in the community, working with people, talking to people, trying to determine what's happening in a particular community. They often very helpfully receive tips from people in the community, private citizens who see something that doesn't sound right or doesn't look right and actually calls. The whole see something, say something campaign, that actually really matters. And it matters not just in corruption, it matters in terrorism, it matters in our drug world, it matters across the board. And we try to make sure that we have eyes and ears on all 40 counties. But I will tell you, you hit the nail on the head. We have 40 counties, 6 million people for whom we're responsible, and we have 80 lawyers. It's not the best ratio ever, but we do every single thing that we can. And of those lawyers, about a third of them are in the civil side of our house. So in addition to all the criminal prosecutions that you see, we represent the United States in our district every time it gets sued, and by golly, that happens a lot. We have our own hospitals, and we have employment cases, and we have personal injury cases, and we have environmental cases. And then we also pursue cases as plaintiffs to try to recover damages when the United States or one of our citizens has been harmed. So it is a tall order and not an easy task, but fortunately, we are blessed with some of the best federal, state, and local law enforcement officers in the nation, and some of the best working partnerships that I've ever seen in all my years in law enforcement. Okay.
Today at the City Club, we have been enjoying a Friday afternoon forum with United States Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, a great leader, a great lawyer, and a great friend, Carole S. Rendon. Today's forum is the David Ralph Hertz Memorial Forum on Civil Liberties, made possible by a generous gift from members of the Hertz family, David N. Myers and the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. We have several members of the Hertz family with us today, and we thank you for your continued support of the City Club. Our community partners for today's forum are the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association and the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. We appreciate your partnership. We welcome guests at tables hosted by the Cleveland Clinic, Government and Community Relations, Cleveland Clinic Law Department, friends of Harriet Fader, who I think are probably friends of Carole Rendon also, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Ohio, who are also, I hope, friends of Carole Rendon. We also welcome students from Mentor Schools, Westlake High School to today's forum. Student participation in City Club's forums are made possible by a grant from the Laub Foundation. We thank all of you, especially you, for being here today. And that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, Ms. Rendon. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. For those to whom it applies, Lashana Tova Tikatevu. Today's forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskind Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.